week, we talked about the first 3 steps to reaching all of your piano goals this year. We talked about goals and routine, mindset, and technique. And today, we're going to dive into the other 3 steps that you can take to reach all of your piano goals this year. As I talked about in part 1, these steps stem from years of working with thousands of adults and witnessing the most common areas where people get stuck and where progress becomes stagnant. My goal is always for you to get the biggest results with the simplest methods. The first step that we're going to talk about is rhythm. When I say rhythm, I don't just mean being able to open up a piece of music and figure out how to count the rhythm. That is part of rhythm, yes. When I'm talking about rhythm here on the channel and with all of the people that I work with, what I'm really talking about is counting out loud when you are practicing and playing and using the metronome. And those 2 things, when put in combination, will completely transform the way that you practice and the way that you sound when you play the piano. Most people don't count out loud. And in fact, a lot of teachers that I know don't have their students count out loud. And I know what that's like because I didn't grow up counting out loud. And when I got to college, I was in for a very large surprise when I started taking lessons from a professor who was very adamant about counting out loud. I was hesitant, I was reluctant. It wasn't something that came easy to me. And in fact, learning how to count out loud when you've already been playing the piano for a while can be really challenging. But I want you to take the time to start counting out loud when you're practicing and also to incorporate like 2 minutes of rhythm practice into your everyday practice routine so that your rhythm skills start to develop and so that you start to feel really solid with rhythm. Now, I have tons of ways that you can do that. My favorite way is to use this one specific rhythm book, and I'll link to a video in the description and you can check that video out when you're done with this one. But the reason that rhythm is so sneaky is because if you're not counting out loud and if you're not using the metronome, you are likely struggling with hand coordination. You are likely playing a lot of wrong notes. You are likely pausing a lot when you are trying to play through a piece. And oftentimes people think that these problems exist in separate little boxes and that they need to seek out the answers to address every single one of these problems individually. But all of these problems actually have a lot to do with the different layers of memory that are at play when you are practicing a piece, when you're learning a piece, when you're playing through a piece. And I don't mean memory in the sense that you're trying to memorize your piece. I mean the way that your brain works and the way that you commit various aspects of what you're doing at the piano to memory. So like when you can remember the notes, or when you can remember the rhythm, or when you can remember which hand is playing where in relation to one another. And so the easiest way to solve issues with hand coordination or wrong notes or pauses in your playing is actually to just start counting out loud. And if you can do that with the metronome and you add that extra foolproof layer to make sure that you're not changing tempos so that things remain consistent, you're laying a very solid foundation in your practice, because every time you drill a section, you're applying a framework, counting out loud in the metronome, that forces you to be consistent in how you're playing. And when you can be consistent over and over throughout time, that's when things really start to solidify in your brain. And when you sit down one day to practice and you realize that everything you did the previous day has stuck, and your hands remember it, and it feels a little bit more effortless than it did before. I wanted to give a quick shout out to some of the people here on the channel that have been commenting on videos. Thank you so much for your feedback. It really means a lot to me to know if these videos are helpful to you or not. I do actually read every single comment and respond to every single comment, so let me know if you're liking what you're seeing or if there's anything that you want to see more of. And if you are getting value from these videos, go ahead and share them on one of your social media pages. Not only would it really help me out, but it would also help get this information to other people who might be struggling in their piano playing and who really strive to play beautifully just like you. The second step that we're going to talk about in today's video, part 2 of reaching all of your piano goals this year, is musicality. And musicality is a big topic because, again, similar to some of the other things that we're talking about in these videos, it's not necessarily something that exists in its own separate box. It's informed by other things. So if you're playing a lot of wrong notes, if you're playing incorrect rhythm, if your technique isn't proper, it's going to be really hard to sound musical. And that's why I'm going in the specific order that I'm going in, because all of the things that we talked about in part 1, and then also rhythm, which we already talked about, is going to contribute to your ability to be able to play musically. Playing musically requires a certain amount of freedom at the piano, and it also requires a certain solidification of some of the other concepts. But when we do want to work on the concept of musicality on its own, a great way to do that is to be as dramatic as possible with your dynamics. And a lot of people think that they are doing really dramatic dynamics. We hear in our head how we want it to sound, right? So we hear lots of dynamics. We hear all of this beautiful expression. But then when we're actually playing, it's not necessarily sounding how it's sounding in our mind. I recommend that you assign dynamic numbers. I have a whole other video about that, so I'll link that in the description below. I also recommend that you record yourself so that you can really listen neutrally neutrally, when you're not focused on trying to produce the sound. You can listen and hear if the dynamics are actually coming through how you intend them to. And dynamics alone can make a piece feel very, very musical if you do them dramatically. Now, the third step that we're going to talk about in today's video is using revolutionary practice methods. I am obsessed with these methods. I talk about them all the time because they get big results. That's it. They're simple, they are easy to apply, and if you do them correctly, they will solve all of your problems in your piano playing. You will make progress in every single practice session. And that's why I teach them and talk about them endlessly, because they work for all levels. They work for all types of music, and that's why I consider them to be hugely revolutionary. So my 3 favorite revolutionary practice methods are the post-it method, practicing in rhythms, and using flash practice. And I have an entire video where I talk about all 3 of those methods. I break them down, I tell you how to use them, and I'll link that in the description as well. Revolutionary practice methods are a huge part of Casual to Confident Piano Player, where we meet for live group classes twice a week, and I hear you play, and I tell you exactly which methods to use to solve your issues. I actually practice with people in class and guide them through how to use these exact methods for their specific pieces and their specific issues so that they get results. And so if you've already been using some of these revolutionary practice methods and you want to dig deeper into that and you want to really understand exactly which method to use for which scenario, I would highly recommend that you check out Casual to Confident Piano Player. I'll link it in the description below. Now go ahead and dive into that rhythm tutorial so that you can get started with these 3 steps that will help you reach all of your piano goals this year.